The gunshot ripped through the Montana night like a crack in the world itself. Silas Redwood stood on his porch, the old revolver smoking in his weathered hand. The cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't feel it. His eyes, old and tired but sharp as an eagle's, were locked on the young man sprawled in the dirt. Blood was blooming on his shirt, a dark, terrible flower under the pale moonlight. Out of the darkness a voice came, low and full of gravel. "You killed my nephew." Silas didn't even flinch. He'd been waiting on this moment for 23 long years. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the pines. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. The moon caught the silver in his beard and the ice-cold fury in his eyes. This was a man who had been nursing a grudge for a long, long time. "He came for the box," Silas said, his voice a rough whisper. "Just like you, Hollister." The man, Hollister, took another step forward. "Just like 23 years ago," he growled, "when you killed my brother." A sudden, sharp pain shot through Silas's leg, an old friend waking up to say hello. It was the same leg where a bullet had shattered his knee on that blood-soaked night, all those years ago. He gritted his teeth, fighting to stay upright, refusing to show this man, of all men, any weakness. "I've been waiting for you," Silas said, his breath making ghosts in the frigid air. "A long time." Hollister's hand hovered over the pistol at his hip. "Not as long," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "as I've waited for this." But this story of blood and vengeance, didn't start with a gunshot. It started 6 months earlier, with a blizzard. Montana winters have a way of stripping a man down to his bones, showing you what he's really made of. Silas Redwood knew this better than anyone. At 68, he'd seen more winters than most folks saw years, and some days, he wondered why he'd even bothered. The wind howled outside his little cabin, throwing handfuls of snow against the windows like angry ghosts. Silas sat in his rocking chair by the fire, a worn-out Bible open on his lap. But he wasn't reading. He rarely did these days. It was just a habit, like everything else in his life. Tending the cattle, mending fences, surviving. He glanced up at the mantel. A faded photograph sat there in a simple wooden frame. A beautiful woman with dark hair and smart, kind eyes, holding a little girl with the same thoughtful look. Margaret and Sarah, his wife and daughter. Gone. 23 years gone. Silas closed the Bible. He didn't mark his place. He'd just start from the same spot tomorrow, same as he always did. He pushed himself up, his bad leg screaming in protest. The old bullet wound never did heal right. It left him with a limp, a constant physical reminder of everything he'd lost. As if the hole in his heart wasn't enough. The cabin was small, but it was solid. He'd built it with his own 2 hands, back when he brought Margaret here as a bride. He was a different man then. He was Silas Redwood, the legendary lawman, the bounty hunter who tracked the Wilson gang across 3 territories. A man whose name made outlaws shake in their boots from the Dakotas to the Mexican border. Now he was just an old rancher with a few head of cattle, living out his days alone. He did his nightly rounds, checking the locks, though he hadn't had a visitor in months. Winter in these parts sealed you off from the world. He paused at Sarah's bedroom door. He did this every night. He never went in, but he always paused. The room was exactly as she'd left it. She was 16 when she died. The quilt her mother had made was still on the bed. Her books were still on the shelf. Her silver hairbrushes still sat on the dresser. Hanging on the wall was the last thing Margaret ever painted. It was a picture of an old wooden box, covered in strange, swirling carvings. Sometimes, in the dim light from the fire, Silas swore the symbols on the painting seemed to move, like they were trying to tell him something. But that was just a trick of old eyes and even older grief. He turned to go back to his chair, and that's when he heard it, a faint pounding. It was almost lost in the howl of the wind, but it was there. Someone was knocking on his front door, in the middle of a blizzard. Silas grabbed his shotgun from its rack above the fireplace. Visitors were rare. Visitors in a storm like this? That wasn't just rare. It was bad news. "Who's there?" he called out, standing to the side of the door just in case. A voice answered, weak and thin. Help, please. Silas opened the door just a crack, the shotgun held ready. A man was slumped against the porch railing, his fancy city coat caked in snow. His face was pale, his beard neatly trimmed. He looked half frozen. Got caught in the storm, the man gasped. Carriage overturned. A mile back. Silas hesitated for only a second. He lowered the gun and opened the door wider. Get inside before you freeze solid. The stranger stumbled in, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air with him. Silas helped him into the rocking chair by the fire, taking note of his clothes. Expensive wool, fine leather boots. This man wasn't from around here. Roland Harlow, the man managed, extending a trembling hand. I'm in your debt, sir. Silas didn't take the hand. He just turned to stoke the fire. Silas Redwood, you're a long way from anywhere, Mr. Harlow. Harlow's eyes, sharp and intelligent despite his condition, scanned the small cabin. He saw the sparse furniture, the Bible on the table, the photograph on the mantel. I was on my way to Helena, business. He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The driver insisted we could outrun the storm. He was mistaken. Your driver? Unconscious when I left him, I followed your chimney smoke. A violent shiver racked his body. I fear he may not have survived. Silas just grunted. Going out in this blizzard now would be suicide. We'll search at first light. If he found shelter, he might make it. He put a pot of coffee on the stove and got a thick wool blanket for the stranger. As Harlow warmed himself, Silas watched him. His hands were soft, the hands of a man who'd never worked a day in his life. But there was something else, a flicker of calculation in his eyes that reminded Silas of the men he used to hunt. This man was no simple businessman lost in a storm. Suddenly, Harlow spoke, his gaze fixed on the painting of the wooden box. You're a collector. Silas stiffened. That was my wife's work. She was talented. Harlow leaned forward, his eyes tracing the strange symbols on the painted box. Those markings. Most unusual. Something flashed across his face. Was it recognition? Before he smoothed it over with a look of casual interest. I'm something of an antiquities collector myself, based in Boston. Then you're even further from home than I thought. The West has its treasures too, Mr. Redwood, Harlow said, accepting the cup of coffee Silas offered. Native artifacts primarily. The Crow tribe created some remarkable pieces. The mention of the Crow sent a familiar ache through Silas's chest. Margaret had spent years studying their people, their stories. It was her life's work. Before. You've been out here a long time, Harlow observed, his eyes now on the photograph of Margaret and Sarah. Family? They're gone. Silas's tone was a steel door slamming shut. Harlow nodded, seeming to understand. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm grateful for your hospitality. They ate a simple meal of beans and salt pork in silence, the only sound the howling of the wind. After Silas showed Harlow to the small spare room. It used to be his and Margaret's bedroom, but he hadn't been able to sleep in there since she died. At the doorway, Harlow paused. I couldn't help but notice your limp. A war injury? Silas's face hardened into a mask of stone. An old argument, he said flatly. A reminder that justice sometimes comes too late. He shut the door before Harlow could say another word. That night, Silas didn't sleep in a bed. He sat in his chair by the dying fire, the shotgun resting across his lap. Something about Roland Harlow felt wrong. It was more than just a stranger in his house. It was a feeling he hadn't had in over 20 years. The feeling of being hunted. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in a blanket of blinding white snow. Silas and Harlow found the overturned carriage a mile down the road. The driver hadn't made it. They buried him in the frozen ground, a hard, miserable task that made Silas's leg throb with a dull, angry pain. Harlow had to wait 2 days for the weekly supply wagon from the nearest town. He was a quiet guest, mostly reading or writing in a little leather journal. But Silas kept catching him staring at the painting of the box, staring at the photograph on the mantel. When the wagon finally came, Harlow pressed a gold coin into Silas's hand. It was far too much for a couple of nights of stay. I don't run a hotel, Silas said, trying to give it back. Harlow just smiled, closing Silas's fingers over the coin. Consider it a token of my gratitude. You saved my life, Mr. Redwood. His smile was all warmth and charm, but his eyes were cold as a winter creek. I always repay my debts. As the wagon rattled away, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been set in motion. He didn't know what it was, but it felt like a stone starting to roll downhill. He tried to forget the stranger. Spring came, then summer. The snow melted, calves were born, and life on the ranch settled back into its quiet, lonely rhythm. He almost succeeded in putting Roland Harlow out of his mind. Almost. 2 months later, another carriage appeared on the horizon. This one wasn't a humble supply wagon. It was a gleaming black coach, pulled by 4 powerful horses. It looked like it belonged in a city, not on his dusty ranch road. Silas watched it approach from his porch, a feeling of dread coiling in his gut like a snake. No one ever came to visit him. Ever. The carriage stopped, and a young boy jumped down, holding an envelope. Mr. Redwood? Silas nodded. Mr. Harlow sends his regards, the boy said, thrusting the envelope at him before backing away like Silas was a wolf. Silas tore it open. The handwriting was elegant, precise. To the man who saved my life, please accept this token of my deepest gratitude. These 2 women will bring warmth to your cold Montana nights. They are obedient and know their place. Consider them yours now, to do with as you please. Your humble servant, Roland Harlow Silas, looked up from the letter, his mind reeling, and then he froze. The carriage door had opened. 2 women were stepping out. They were Native American, their long black hair braided with leather. They wore simple dresses, but it wasn't their clothes that made Silas's blood run cold. It was the iron shackles on their wrists, connected by a short, heavy chain. The younger one, barely more than a girl, kept her eyes on the ground, trembling. The older one, maybe in her mid-20s, stood tall. She held her chin up, defiant despite the chains. Her dark eyes met Silas's, and there was no fear in them, only fire. What in God's name? Silas muttered. Before he could move, the driver cracked his whip. The carriage lurched away, kicking up dust, leaving the 2 chained women standing alone in his yard. Silas walked toward them slowly. The letter crumpled in his fist. The older woman moved to stand slightly in front of the younger one. A shield. Do you speak English? He asked. Yes, the older one said. Her voice was low but clear as a bell. I am Willa. This is my sister, Aya. You are Crow, Silas stated. It wasn't a question. A flicker of surprise crossed Willa's face. Yes. How did you know? Silas ignored the question. He pointed at their shackles. Where's the key? The driver has it. Aya spoke for the first time. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but had the same steel underneath. Silas nodded once, then turned and walked to his barn without another word. He came back with a hammer and a chisel. The women tensed as he approached, but he moved slow, deliberate. Hold still, he said, and with a few sharp, precise strikes, he shattered the lock on Willa's shackle. He did the same for Aya. The women rubbed their wrists, looking at him with confusion and suspicion. Mr. Harlow said, Willa began. I don't give a damn what Harlow said, Silas cut her off, his voice like gravel. He tossed the broken shackles onto the porch. You're not property here. He turned and limped back toward the cabin. He was halfway to the door when he realized they weren't following. He stopped and looked back. Well, night comes fast out here. You'll want to be inside before then. Hesitantly, they followed him. He showed them to Sarah's room. He'd never let another soul step foot in that room, but something about the look in these women's eyes, the quiet terror hidden beneath their bravery, made him break his own rule. You'll sleep here, he said gruffly. I'll bring water. He left them alone, their soft voices speaking in their native tongue filling the hallway. What in the hell was he going to do with them? He couldn't just turn them out. But what did Harlow want? Why send him 2 women in chains? It was a message, a threat. But what was the game? He brought a basin of hot water to the room. When he entered, Aya was holding Sarah's silver hairbrush. Willa was standing in front of Margaret's painting of the wooden box. This is beautiful, Willa said, her finger hovering over the painted symbols. My wife painted it, Silas said, setting the water down. A long time ago. Your wife, Willa said, her voice carefully neutral, knew our symbols. Silas stiffened. My wife was an anthropologist. She studied your people. And now, Willa said, her gaze sweeping the room, we are in her daughter's room. His eyes narrowed. How did you know that? It was Aya who answered, her voice soft but sure. A mother made this quilt, but a young girl slept beneath it. She touched the faded fabric. Her spirit is still here, waiting. A chill, cold and sharp, went straight down Silas's spine. That's enough of that talk, he said, his voice harsher than he intended. Get cleaned up. There's food when you're ready. He closed the door behind him, his heart pounding. The girl was too perceptive. Or maybe it was something more. Maybe the ghosts in this house were finally starting to talk. And Silas had a terrible feeling he knew what they were trying to say. The days that followed were tense. The sisters were hard workers. Willa had a way with horses, and Aya brought Margaret's old herb garden back to life. Silas kept his distance, watching them, trying to figure out their angle. He didn't trust them. Not one bit. Harlow had sent them for a reason, and it wasn't out of the kindness of his heart. A week after they arrived, Silas was woken up in the middle of the night. A noise. A soft scraping sound coming from his storage room. He grabbed the revolver he always kept by his bed and moved down the hall, silent as a shadow. He pushed the door open with his foot, the gun raised. Willa stood frozen in the lantern light, her hand buried deep in his old trunk. The trunk where he kept the remnants of his old life. Papers, books, wanted posters. Looking for something? Silas's voice was deadly quiet. She straightened up slowly. He expected her to lie, to make an excuse, but she didn't. Yes, she said. The honesty of it caught him off guard. What? He demanded, keeping the gun steady. Willa took a breath. Then she looked him straight in the eye. A box, a wooden box, with carvings like the ones in your wife's painting. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. The world seemed to shrink down to the space between them. Why? Her face was a mask of fear and determination. Real fear. Not for herself, for someone else. Because if I don't find it, she said, her voice cracking, my brother will die. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Silas stared at her, the gun unwavering. A box, the painting, a brother held hostage. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to click into place, and the picture they were forming was dark and terrifying. Harlow wasn't just some rich collector. He was a monster, and he had just dragged his war right onto Silas's doorstep. Sit down, Silas said, gesturing with the gun, and you're going to tell me everything, right now. Willa sat, her back ramrod straight. Harlow is not what he seems, she began. He holds our brother Nathan, captive at an old silver mine. He sent us here to find a box he believes you have. Why would he think that? A dying merchant gave it to you 12 years ago, she said, during a snowstorm. The merchant stole it from our people. Harlow has been searching for it ever since. Silas's blood ran cold. He remembered. Ezekiel Foster. He'd stumbled to Silas's door in a blizzard, a bullet in his side, clutching a carved wooden box. He'd made Silas promise to keep it safe until his son came for it. Silas had buried the box under the floorboards of the barn and hadn't thought about it since. The door creaked open, and Aya appeared, her eyes wide. She saw the gun and froze. Your sister was just explaining why you're really here, Silas said, his voice like ice. Aya rushed to her sister's side. We had no choice. Nathan, he's all we have left. And what's so special about this box? Silas demanded. Why does Harlow want it so bad? He thinks it contains a map, Willa said. A map to a treasure. Silas shook his head. Then Harlow's a fool. There's no treasure map. Then what is in it? Aya whispered. Silas finally lowered the gun. I don't know, he admitted. I never opened it. The sisters stared at him, stunned. You've had it all this time and never looked inside? I made a promise to a dying man. The words sounded hollow now, foolish. A promise that might get their brother killed. A promise that had brought this darkness back into his life. What will you do with us now? Aya asked, her voice trembling. It was a fair question. They'd lied to him. They'd searched his home. He should march them both to town and wash his hands of the whole mess. But he looked at their faces, saw the desperate hope in their eyes, and he saw something else. He saw a reflection of his own loss, the pain of family torn apart, and he thought of Roland Harlow with his cold eyes and his false smile, using these women, using him, as pawns in some sick game. "Nothing tonight," he said, his voice tired. "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." After they left, Silas went to the barn. He pried up the floorboards in the corner stall. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was the bundle. He carried it back to the cabin and placed it on the table. He unwrapped it. The box was about the size of a Bible, carved from a dark, smooth wood. The symbols on it were identical to the ones in Margaret's painting. They seemed to writhe in the lamplight. "Do you know what these mean?" he asked the sisters who had followed him out. Aya reached out a trembling hand. "They tell the story of the stone sun," she whispered, "a sacred relic of our people, lost for generations." Silas found the latch. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside, nestled on faded red cloth, were three things: an old leather-bound journal, a folded piece of deerskin with markings on it, and a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "To my son." Silas picked up the journal. Ezekiel Foster, 1862. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the neat script. It was Foster's diary. He started reading aloud. March 15, 1862. Witnessed a sacred ceremony of the Crow people. They revere a stone they call the sun that fell from heaven, a reddish crystal said to have healing properties. He kept reading, his voice growing grimmer with every word. April 3, 1862. The Hollister brothers have offered $500 for information about native artifacts. Their interest seems focused on healing stones. The temptation is great. Silas stopped. He looked up, his eyes sharp. Hollister, October 17, 1862. May God forgive me. I took the stone sun. The payment from the Hollisters was delivered. I could not give the stone to them. Something in Samuel Hollister's eyes frightened me. A coldness, a hunger that seemed unholy. I fear they will come looking. The journal documented Foster's desperate flight across the country, always one step ahead of the Hollister brothers. The final entry was dated the night he died in Silas's cabin. The wound festers. If you read this, Silas Redwood, know that the map will lead to the stone sun. It must be returned to the Crow people. My son, William, will come for this box. Give it to him, and him alone. Silas put down the journal and unfolded the deerskin map. It showed a series of landmarks he recognized. Chimney Rock Valley, a day's ride from here. The stone sun, Aya breathed. It's real. "If Harlow knows what's in this box," Willa said, her voice tight, "he's not after gold. He's after the stone." "Why?" Silas asked. "What's so special about it?" The sisters exchanged another one of their weighted looks. "The legends say it can heal the sick," Aya explained, "but only in the hands of those chosen to wield it, the descendants of those who first found it. Like your brother," Silas concluded, "the grandson of your last spiritual leader." Willa nodded. "If Harlow believes the legends, he needs Nathan to make the stone work." A cold dread was spreading through Silas. He remembered the name from the journal, Samuel Hollister. He limped over to his old trunk and pulled out a dusty, dog-eared photograph. It was taken in town, 25 years ago. A younger Silas stood next to a tall man with a neat beard and eyes as cold as a frozen river. He laid the photo on the table. "That's Samuel Hollister," he said. "We served on the town council together before I moved out here." Willa stared at the photograph. Her eyes narrowed. He looks like Harlow." "Yes," Silas said, the final, terrible piece clicking into place. "Because Roland Harlow isn't his real name. He's Randall Hollister, Samuel's younger brother. And if he's anything like Samuel, we're in more trouble than any of us can imagine." A heavy silence filled the barn. The man who had stayed in his home, who had eaten at his table, was the brother of the man who had ordered his family's murder. He had been right under Silas's nose, and now he had their brother. "First," Silas said, his voice a low growl of pure, cold fury. "We get your brother back. Then we deal with the stone." He closed the box. Hollister didn't know they'd found it. That was their only advantage. "What's your plan?" Willa asked. Silas's weathered face hardened, the lines deepening into something ancient and dangerous. The old lawman, the hunter of men, was stirring from his long sleep. "We set a trap," he said, "and this time, I'll be ready for him." That night Silas dreamed of Margaret. She was riding across the meadow, her dark hair flying in the wind, laughing. Then she turned to him, her eyes full of a terrible sadness. "They're coming, Silas," she said in the dream. "They've always been coming." He woke with a start, tears on his face. The past wasn't buried. It had just been waiting. He rose in the darkness and strapped on his old gun belt. The leather was stiff, the weight of the twin Colts unfamiliar but comforting. His hands remembered. They remembered how to track, how to hunt, how to bring justice to men who thought they were above it. By the time the sisters came out of their room, he had coffee brewing and a plan forming in his mind. The legendary lawman might be old. His leg might be shot. But Silas Redwood wasn't dead yet, and Randall Hollister was about to find that out the hard way. Dawn was just a pale pink smear on the horizon when they rode out. Silas on his old buckskin, the sisters sharing the bay. The box, with its map and its secrets, was tucked safely in his saddlebag. They rode west, toward the jagged peaks of the Rockies, toward Chimney Rock Valley. As they rode, Aya moved her horse alongside his. "Your wife," she said quietly. "She knew our people. They called her Margaret Redfeather. Our grandfather, Chief Thundercloud, he trusted her. He made her a keeper of knowledge, the first outsider ever given that honor." Silas's world tilted again. "Margaret? A keeper of Crow secrets? She never told me." "Perhaps she was protecting you," Aya suggested. "The fewer who knew about the stone, the safer you and Sarah would be." It made a twisted kind of sense. Margaret hadn't just been a victim. She'd been a guardian. She had died protecting a sacred trust. And now somehow, that trust had fallen to him. "I'll finish what you started, Maggie," he whispered to the wind. "I promise." They reached the mountains by late afternoon, setting up a base in an old abandoned hunter's cabin. From a high ridge, Silas used his spyglass to survey the mine below. "Two guards at the entrance," he reported. "I see Hollister. He looks impatient." "The full moon is in 2 weeks," Aya reminded him. "That's his deadline." "We need to find where Foster hid the stone," Silas said, studying the map. "It's in a cave higher up this ridge." They climbed, moving like ghosts through the pines. It was Aya who found it, a small opening hidden by a fallen tree, with the faint, carved symbols beside it. Inside the cave, on a crude stone altar, sat a small leather pouch. Silas opened it and tipped the contents into his palm. A stone the size of a hen's egg tumbled out. It was a deep, translucent red, shot through with veins of gold. Even in the dim light of the lantern, it seemed to pulse with a faint inner glow. It was warm to the touch. The stone sun. As Silas held it, a strange thing happened. The constant, grinding ache in his bad leg, the pain that had been his companion for 23 years, simply faded. It didn't disappear completely, but it eased into a dull, distant throb. Coincidence, he told himself. Just the excitement of the moment. "We should go," Willa urged. "We've been gone too long." They were making their way back down the ridge when Aya froze, her hand held up in a silent warning. Silas heard them a second later. Voices. Two of Hollister's men, climbing the trail below. "Waste of time," one of them was grumbling. "Those Indian girls probably ran off with the box." "Boss says they'll be back," the other replied. "Says they care too much about their brother." Silas gestured for the sisters to hide. He drew his revolver, his heart pounding a slow, steady drumbeat. The men were getting closer. Then one of them stopped. "You smell that? Smoke! Like a campfire!" Silas cursed silently. The wind must have carried the scent from their cabin. "Probably just a hunter," the second man said. "Maybe," the first one growled, unslinging his rifle. "Or maybe our girls found some help. Let's check it out." They were heading straight for the boulder where the sisters were hiding. Silas had no choice. A firefight would bring the whole nest of hornets down on them. He holstered his gun and drew his knife. In a blur of motion that defied his age, he was on the first man, an arm around his throat, the blade finding its mark. The man went down without a sound. The second man turned, raising his rifle. But Willa was already moving. She exploded from behind the boulder, her own knife flashing. She buried it in the man's chest. His fingers spasmed on the trigger. But Aya was there too. She threw herself forward, shoving the rifle barrel up just as it fired. The gunshot echoed through the forest like the crack of doom. For a heartbeat, they all stood frozen. Then Silas's voice cut through the silence. "Move! That shot will bring the others. Now!" They dragged the bodies into the trees, grabbed their gear from the cabin, and ran. The element of surprise was gone. Hollister knew they were here, and he knew they had help. That night, huddled around a tiny hidden fire, Silas laid out his new plan. It was desperate. It was dangerous. It might get them all killed. "We can't fight our way in," he said, "so we let Hollister think he's won." The next morning, under the cover of a thick fog, they put the plan in motion. Willa would walk right up to the mine entrance, claiming she had the box. She would demand to see Nathan as proof of life. While Hollister was distracted, Silas and Aya would sneak in through a different way, an old ventilation shaft he'd spotted on the ridge. They found the shaft, a dark hole in the side of the mountain. Silas went first, lowering himself into the darkness. Aya followed. They moved through the stale, silent tunnels of the old mine, guided by the faint light of distant lanterns. They came to a junction. Two guards sat playing cards. Before they could even react, Silas had his revolver on them. "Where's the boy?" he demanded. The guards, seeing the cold, hard look of death in the old man's eyes, didn't hesitate. They told him. Silas and Aya tied them up, gagged them, and left them in a side tunnel. They found Nathan in a makeshift cell, a small cavern blocked by iron bars. He was bruised and thin, but his eyes still held a spark of defiance. Silas picked the lock in seconds. They were making their way back when they rounded a corner and stopped dead. Randall Hollister stood there, flanked by three of his men, and he was smiling. "Mr. Redwood," he said, his voice smooth as poison, "I must admit, I didn't recognize you at your cabin. The years have not been kind." Silas's hand went to his gun, but Hollister just shook his head. "I wouldn't. My men are very quick." They were trapped. "Where's Willa?" Aya demanded. "Your sister is quite safe," Hollister said. "She was most helpful, in fact. She delivered exactly what I've been seeking for so long." He turned his cold eyes back to Silas. "I think it's time you all joined her. There's someone who's been waiting a very, very long time to see you again, Sheriff." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp mine air snaked its way down Silas's spine. He knew who Hollister meant. Samuel. Hollister's men led them into the main chamber of the mine. It was huge, like a dark cathedral. Lanterns cast flickering, uneasy shadows. Willa stood at the far end, her face a stone mask, and beside her, on a flat slab of rock, lay a man, or what was left of one. He was a skeleton draped in pale, waxy skin. His chest barely moved as he breathed. His eyes were sunken into his skull, but they were open, and they were burning. Pale blue fires of pure, concentrated hate burning in the ruins of his face. Those terrible eyes found Silas. A lipless mouth stretched into a ghastly smile. A voice like dry leaves scraping across a tombstone whispered his name. "Sheriff." It was Samuel Hollister. He was alive. "Impressive, isn't it?" Randall said, moving to his brother's side. "The strength of will that has kept him here, waiting." "This isn't life," Silas said, his voice hoarse with horror. "It's torture." "After what you did to him," Randall snarled. "After he murdered my family," Silas roared back. "They were never supposed to die," Randall screamed. "We only wanted the stone. Your wife, Margaret Redfeather. She took it. She intercepted our man, Foster, and took the real stone, leaving him with a fake. We went to your home to get it back from her." The truth hit Silas like a physical blow. Margaret hadn't been a random victim. They had come for her. They had come for the stone. And she had died protecting it, protecting him. "And now," Randall said, his voice dropping to a triumphant whisper, The final act. He pulled the leather pouch from his pocket. Your wife died for nothing, Sheriff. The stone is ours, and Samuel will live again. He looked at Nathan. The legends say only one of your bloodline can use its power, and you, boy, are going to bring my brother back. He nodded to one of his men, who pressed a knife to Aya's throat. I will never help you, Nathan said, his voice shaking with rage. Won't you? Randall smiled. Refuse, and your sister dies right here. But Silas saw his opening. Wait, he said, his voice loud and clear. Before anyone dies, you should know. The stone you have there, it's not the real one. A flicker of doubt crossed Randall's face. He opened the pouch. The red crystal that fell into his palm was just a rock. It didn't glow. It had no warmth. What trick is this? He roared, turning on Willa. I have it, Silas said, drawing all the attention to himself. It was a bluff, a desperate gamble, but it was all he had. Hidden where you'll never find it. Kill me, and Samuel dies for good. Randall's eyes were wild. 23 years of obsession, of hate, all coming to a head in this dark, damp hole in the ground. A negotiation began. Tense, desperate. An agreement was struck. Aya and Willa would be set free. Silas would remain as a hostage, and Nathan, in exchange for their lives, would perform the ritual to heal Samuel. Aya, it turned out, had the real stone hidden in her dress. It was Silas's bluff, made real by her quick thinking. She passed it to Nathan before she and Willa were led away. The ritual began. Nathan chanted in the old tongue. He held the stone, and its red light grew, pulsing like a living heart, filling the cavern with an eerie crimson glow. He placed it on Samuel's wasted chest. The glow spread, illuminating Samuel's body from within. And then, something went wrong. Samuel's body arched off the stone slab. A silent scream ripped from his throat. The red light poured from his eyes, his mouth, his entire body glowing like a hot coal. What's happening? Randall screamed. What have you done? I've done nothing, Nathan said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. The stone judges. Your brother's sins were too great. His soul is too dark. The glow intensified, then collapsed inward, and Samuel Hollister's body fell back to the stone, limp and lifeless. The light of the stone faded, leaving only darkness. Randall's grief turned to pure animal rage in the span of a heartbeat. You did this, he shrieked, pulling his pistol. You'll all pay. In that split second of distraction, Silas moved. He dropped, grabbing a hunting knife he'd kept hidden in his boot. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it. The blade buried itself in Randall's gun arm. The pistol went off, the shot going wild. Randall howled in pain. Chaos erupted. Nathan threw a bowl of ritual water in a guard's face, blinding him. Silas grabbed Randall's dropped pistol and shot the other guard. Randall staggered back against the wall, his eyes burning with a terrible empty light. He had lost everything. Perhaps it's time this all ended, he said, his voice eerily calm. He pulled a silver lighter from his vest, flicked it open, and tossed it at the nearest wooden support beam. The old dry wood went up like a torch. If my brother can't live, Randall laughed, a hollow, broken sound, then we'll all die together. The fire spread with terrifying speed. The mine was turning into a death trap. We have to get out of here, Silas yelled. He and Nathan ran, leaving Randall Hollister to be consumed by the inferno of his own making, a fitting end for a man who had lived by hate. They plunged into the smoky labyrinth of tunnels, the fire roaring behind them. They were trapped, their escape route blocked by a cave-in. Then Silas felt it, a faint draft of cool, fresh air coming from a crack in the rock wall. Working together, their lungs burning, their bodies screaming with exhaustion, they clawed at the rock, widening the fissure until it was just big enough to squeeze through. They tumbled out into a natural cave system, and then finally into the blinding light of day. They had made it. They found Willa and Aya on the valley floor, safe. The sisters had dealt with their own escorts. They were warriors, all of them, survivors. They rode away from Chimney Rock Valley, not looking back at the pillar of black smoke that marked the funeral pyre of the Hollister brothers. The circle was closed, the debt was paid. They parted ways a few days later. Nathan and Willa took the stone son back to their people, back where it belonged. But Aya, she chose a different path. Your ranch will need tending, she said to Silas, a small smile on her face. And Sarah's garden has just begun to flourish again. And so Silas Redwood, the old lawman who thought his life was over, rode home. But he didn't ride home alone. For 23 years, his ranch had been a house of ghosts, a place of grief and survival. But as he crested the last hill and saw the small cabin nestled in the valley, it didn't look like a tomb anymore. It looked like a home. It looked like a new beginning. The past was finally at peace, buried under the ash and smoke of the old mine. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Silas Redwood was looking forward to tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story of justice and a past that refused to stay buried, make sure you hit that like button. And if you want more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.